There's something about narcissists that almost nobody actually understands. And once it clicks for you, you will never be able to watch them the same way again. Underneath that confidence that seems impossible to crack, underneath the charm that flows out of them like it costs nothing, and underneath that constant sense of being better than everyone around them, there's a kind of quiet suffering that never really lets up. Most people walk around assuming narcissists are perfectly content with themselves. They picture someone who genuinely enjoys the chaos they create, someone who floats through life feeling completely satisfied, free of guilt, free of any inner ache, untouched by the fears that weigh on the rest of us. But the real psychological picture is a lot messier than that. The narcissist is not this untouchable figure they're pretending to be. In a lot of ways, they're carrying some of the heaviest emotional wounds you'll ever come across. That suffering is buried so deep that even the people who know them best usually miss it completely. What you're about to read is going to pull back a curtain most people never get to look behind, into the private inner world of the narcissist. If you're someone who wants to understand people on a deeper level, someone who wants to spot manipulation before it traps you, someone who wants to make sense of hidden emotions and the patterns underneath human behavior, stick with this. Everything that follows only lands once you're willing to look past the surface. And once you do that, it gets a lot harder for anyone to fool you with appearances again. Most of us grow up believing that confidence and happiness go hand in hand, that the loudest person in the room must also be the most at peace with themselves. It's a comforting assumption, and it's also almost completely wrong when it comes to the narcissistic personality. The very traits that make a narcissist so magnetic on the surface, the boldness, the certainty, the effortless charisma, are frequently the exact traits built to cover something they cannot bear to look at directly. What follows isn't meant to make you pity them into staying or to excuse the harm they've caused. It's meant to hand you something far more useful than sympathy. It's meant to hand you understanding, because understanding is what finally lets you stop taking their behavior personally and start seeing it for the defense mechanism it actually is. The first sign of this hidden suffering is almost impossible to spot from the outside, yet it sits right at the center of everything they do. It's a feeling of emptiness that never fully goes away. From a distance, narcissists tend to look like the most self-assured people in the room. They come across convinced of their own importance, proud, sure of themselves, completely at peace with who they are. But inside, there's usually a hollow space where a solid sense of self should be sitting. This isn't emptiness that shows up only on bad days or during rough patches. It stays with them almost constantly. They feel it in moments of quiet. They feel it the instant attention drifts away. They feel it when nobody's watching, when no one's clapping, when there's no one around to reflect back the image they're so desperate for the world to see. And because that emptiness feels so unbearable, they end up spending most of their lives trying to patch it from the outside. They chase attention because without it, they start to feel like they're disappearing. They go after status because it gives them a temporary escape from what's happening inside. They demand admiration because the second it stops, they're forced to sit face to face with the void they've worked so hard to avoid. This is a big reason why narcissists so rarely find any real peace. Stillness makes them uneasy. Being alone feels like a punishment. Quiet moments expose the exact thing their whole grand image was built to cover up. You'll probably notice they're constantly generating noise around themselves, filling silence with non-stop talking, replacing uncertainty with bold, sweeping claims, filling any open space with new goals, new drama, new relationships, new audiences to perform for. What looks like non-stop energy and activity is often really just a form of running away. What they're actually escaping from is the painful experience of sitting alone with themselves. No mask on, no performance running, no image left to hide behind. The second sign shows up in something a lot of people completely misread. It's their constant dissatisfaction with everything they already have. From the outside, it can look like ambition. It can look like someone with impossibly high standards, someone who simply refuses to settle. But underneath that surface, something very different is going on. A lot of narcissists genuinely struggle to hold on to satisfaction for any real length of time. The moment they finally get something they wanted, the excitement drains out almost immediately. The relationship that felt perfect a month ago suddenly looks disappointing. The achievement that once felt huge stops meaning anything. The person they used to admire starts looking ordinary, even flawed. This isn't happening because life keeps letting them down over and over. It's happening because their inner world simply can't hold on to a feeling of fulfillment for very long. Real, lasting satisfaction requires a person to feel secure, grounded, and emotionally connected to who they are. That foundation is usually missing in a narcissist. So instead, they end up living in a constant state of wanting more attention, more success, more admiration, more proof that they actually matter. And no matter how much of it they get, it almost never feels like enough. That creates a genuinely painful kind of psychological suffering. From the outside, it reads as drive and ambition. From the inside, it feels like an endless hunger that never gets satisfied. They chase down a goal and still feel hollow. They step into a new relationship and still feel hollow. They rack up accomplishment after accomplishment, and the emptiness just keeps following them around. Instead of turning inward to figure out why, they usually point outward and blame the world around them. They convince themselves the next win will finally do it. The next relationship will finally make them happy. The next person who admires them will finally fill the hole. But it never does, because the problem was never really out there in the world. The wound lives inside them, and no amount of outside success can heal something that's staying hidden from their own awareness. What makes this particularly cruel is that from a distance, this cycle can look like drive, like someone who simply refuses to be complacent, like the kind of person who's always reaching for the next level. Friends and colleagues might even admire it, might hold it up as an example of ambition worth copying. But if you look closely enough, you'll notice there's never a finish line. There's never a moment where they sit back and say, "This is enough, I'm satisfied, I did it." That moment doesn't exist for them because satisfaction was never really the goal. The goal was silencing the ache, if only for a minute, and the ache always finds its way back. The third sign runs even deeper, and it's something narcissists work incredibly hard to hide. It's the sheer exhausting effort it takes to keep up a false self. Every narcissist builds an image for the world, a version of themselves that's stronger, smarter, more attractive, more successful, more important, more special than they actually feel underneath it all. This isn't just some role they slip into now and then. It becomes an entire psychological structure, and holding that structure together takes enormous energy. Picture living every single day like you're performing on a stage, never once feeling free enough to step out of character, always carrying this quiet dread that if people ever saw the real you, everything you've built would come crashing down. That's the weight a lot of narcissists are carrying around. They're constantly tracking how other people see them, paying close attention to every impression they leave, replaying conversations in their heads, scanning for any sign that their image might be slipping. They can't afford to let themselves be fully known because being fully known means being fully seen. And being fully seen means facing the very parts of themselves they've spent years running from. All of that pressure builds into exhaustion. Sometimes it shows up as irritability. Sometimes it explodes as sudden anger. Other times it turns into cold withdrawal or an intense need to control everything around them. People often wonder how someone who seems so powerful and self-assured can fall apart over a small piece of criticism. The real answer runs deeper than it looks. They're not just protecting their ego in that moment. They're protecting the entire structure that's holding them emotionally together. A narcissist isn't arrogant because they genuinely feel superior deep down. They're arrogant because feeling ordinary is something they simply cannot tolerate. Their grandiosity isn't some form of healthy self-love. It's a way of compensating for a fragile sense of self that never really got the chance to develop properly. This is also why a hit to their ego, what psychologists sometimes call narcissistic injury, can be so devastating for them. When someone calls out their flaws, questions the image they've built, or withholds the admiration they're expecting, it doesn't register as a small annoyance. It feels like a direct threat to their entire existence. For a narcissist, the false self isn't just a mask they can take off. It becomes the only identity they know how to actually live inside of. So threatening it feels like threatening the very foundation their whole world is standing on. That's why their reactions can seem so out of proportion. That's why they can turn explosive, defensive, even cruel, over situations that look small to everyone watching from the outside. What looks like an overreaction is usually an attempt to protect themselves from a kind of psychological collapse. Think about how tiring it would be to never let your guard down, not even at home, not even with the people who supposedly know you best. Most of us get to release that pressure somewhere. We get to be a little messy in front of a partner, a little unfiltered around close friends, a little unimpressive in front of family who love us anyway. The narcissist rarely allows themselves that release valve because unimpressive feels dangerously close to worthless. So the performance runs almost around the clock, and a performance that never stops is a performance that eventually burns the performer out. If any of this is helping you make sense of patterns you've noticed in someone close to you, keep paying attention, because it only gets more revealing from here. The deeper your understanding of human behavior goes, the more clearly you're able to spot manipulation, emotional confusion, and unhealthy dynamics before they trap you. Knowledge builds clarity, and clarity builds protection. The fourth sign of this hidden suffering lives inside a fear they almost never show but constantly carry with them. It's the fear of becoming irrelevant. Underneath the confidence, underneath the grand image, underneath that constant need to feel superior, there's often a powerful, gnawing fear of being forgotten. They're afraid of being overlooked. They're afraid of being replaced. They're afraid of slipping into ordinary. For most people, the idea of being average might feel mildly uncomfortable at worst. But for a narcissist, it can feel completely unbearable because their entire identity is built on feeling special, chosen, important, exceptional. The possibility of becoming unremarkable can feel like a kind of psychological death sentence. That's why narcissists struggle so intensely whenever they're no longer the center of attention. That's why they often feel threatened the moment someone else receives praise. That's why they'll sometimes work to undercut people who are outshining them. And that's why celebrating someone else's success can be surprisingly hard for them to do sincerely. For most people, another person's success is simply that, another person's success. But for a narcissist, it can feel like proof that something important is slipping away from them. Every compliment handed to someone else can feel like a compliment taken directly from them. Every achievement someone else lands can feel like a challenge to their own sense of worth. This tends to get sharper as they get older. Aging is uncomfortable for plenty of people, but it carries a particularly heavy weight for narcissists. Over time, a lot of the things they've relied on for validation start shifting. Physical attractiveness fades. Social influence changes shape. Positions of power become less stable. The attention that used to come to them effortlessly starts drifting toward younger, newer, more energetic people. The very tools they've used to hold their image together get harder and harder to maintain. And as those old sources of validation start disappearing, the emotional pain they've spent years dodging finally starts catching up with them. This is part of why some narcissists get more controlling as they age. Some grow more bitter. Some become more suspicious of the people around them. Others turn emotionally unpredictable. It's not always obvious from the outside why this is happening, but underneath it, they're often wrestling with the dawning realization that admiration is getting harder to secure. The world stops responding to them the way it used to. The attention they depended on becomes less and less reliable. And because they never built a solid internal foundation to fall back on, they've got almost nothing to catch them. They watch younger people rise and feel envy instead of pride. They watch their own influence shrink and feel panic instead of acceptance. They watch the world keep moving forward without them and experience it as a personal attack. Underneath all of it sits the same fear that's followed them for years, the fear that if they're not extraordinary, they're nothing at all. It's worth pausing here because this is one of the clearest windows into how a narcissist actually experiences the world. Most people build their sense of worth from a mix of things: relationships, small daily wins, personal values, the quiet knowledge that they're trying their best. A narcissist rarely has that mix available to them. Their sense of worth is tied almost entirely to external proof, and external proof is, by nature, unstable. It comes and goes. It shifts with trends, with age, with circumstance, with who else happens to be in the room. Building an identity on something that's unstable is a bit like building a house on sand, and on some level, even if they'd never admit it out loud, they know it. That quiet awareness is part of what drives the constant vigilance, the constant need to check and recheck whether they're still winning, still admired, still relevant. The fifth sign might be the deepest and most heartbreaking of them all, because it touches the central wound sitting at the very core of the narcissistic personality. It's their inability to experience genuine emotional intimacy. Plenty of narcissists have relationships. They might have romantic partners. They might have families. They might have loyal friends, followers, or admirers surrounding them constantly. From the outside, it can look like they're never alone. But being surrounded by people isn't the same thing as being emotionally connected to any of them. Real intimacy demands vulnerability. It demands trust. It demands the willingness to reveal your fears, your insecurities, your weaknesses, your emotional needs to another person. For a narcissist, that can feel almost impossible to do. Letting someone else see those hidden parts of themselves feels dangerous. It feels exposing. It feels genuinely risky. So they keep those parts locked away, out of sight. They might share stories. They might share opinions. They might even open up about certain personal experiences. But the deepest layers of who they are stay hidden behind carefully built defenses. As a result, they often live in a kind of emotional isolation, even in the middle of a full life. Even when people love them, even when people support them, even surrounded by constant attention, the loneliness never actually lifts. This is the kind of loneliness that attention can't fix. It's the kind of emptiness admiration can't fill. It's the kind of hunger that outlasts every relationship they try to build. Again and again, they go looking for connection in ways that never truly deliver it. They chase control, they chase dependence, they chase admiration, they chase emotional power over other people, but they rarely go after the one thing that actually creates real closeness, which is honest emotional openness. Because of that, a lot of their relationships end up leaving them feeling even emptier than before they started. The real tragedy here is that what they actually need is often exactly the thing their own psychological defenses won't let them accept. Real love requires being seen. Real love requires being known. Real love requires letting another person witness your fears, your flaws, your emotional needs out in the open. But for a narcissist, that level of openness can feel completely unbearable. Instead of creating safety, vulnerability registers as danger. Instead of creating connection, being exposed feels like humiliation. So they stay just outside the emotional closeness they secretly crave, spending their lives reaching toward intimacy while simultaneously fighting it off. They mistake admiration for love. They mistake control for connection. They mistake possession for partnership. And when those illusions eventually collapse, they usually turn around and blame everyone but themselves. They blame partners, they blame friends, they blame family, they blame circumstances. Rarely do they stop to notice that the exact same pattern has followed them into every relationship they've ever had. The source of the problem was never really the people around them. The source is the emotional wall they've been carrying inside themselves the whole time, a locked door they're too afraid to ever open. This is the suffering hiding underneath all that arrogance. This is the pain sitting quietly beneath that appearance of superiority. Understanding all of this doesn't excuse harmful behavior. It doesn't erase the damage a narcissist can cause in someone's life. It doesn't remove their responsibility for their own actions, but it does reveal something genuinely important. It helps you see them with more clarity. It helps you understand that what looks so powerful on the surface is often much more fragile underneath than it appears. It breaks the illusion that they've somehow got life figured out. It challenges the belief that they're winning at life while everyone else is struggling to keep up. The truth is usually very different. A lot of the people who look strongest from a distance are fighting invisible battles with themselves every single day. And once you really understand that, their grip on you starts to loosen. The fear they used to create starts fading. The emotional control they once held over you becomes a lot less effective, because now you're able to see them for what they actually are. Not a god, not a monster, not some unstoppable force, but a wounded human being trapped inside a psychological structure they spent years constructing brick by brick. And when that structure eventually starts to crack, the fallout can be devastating to watch. When the admiration finally dries up, when rejection shows up at the door, when relationships come to an end, when failures pile up too high to keep denying, when the audience walks away, when the mask simply can't be held in place any longer, something painful starts to surface. And what emerges underneath is rarely strength. More often, it's collapse. It's a depression they don't fully understand or know how to name. It's rage they can't seem to control. It's shame they can't bring themselves to face. It's grief for the person they might have become if they'd only let themselves be that person all along. This is exactly why a narcissistic collapse can be one of the most psychologically intense experiences a human being can go through. It isn't simple disappointment. It isn't simple failure. It's the slow breakdown of an identity they spent their entire life protecting. Everything they used to depend on starts feeling unstable under their feet. Everything they use to define themselves by starts losing its power, and suddenly they're standing face to face with the very feelings they've spent years running from. The deepest tragedy in all of this is that the thing they're running from is often exactly the thing that could actually help them heal. The simple, frightening experience of just being an imperfect human being, a person with flaws, a person with fears, a person with real emotional needs, a person who doesn't have to be extraordinary in order to be worthy of love. And yet so many narcissists spend their entire lives avoiding that one truth. The more they run from it, the more trapped they become. The more energy they pour into defending the false self, the further they drift from the real one underneath, and the emotional cost of that distance only keeps growing over time. If any of this has helped explain experiences you've personally lived through, then maybe it's offering you something genuinely valuable right now. It offers clarity. It offers perspective. It offers a deeper understanding of behavior that so often looks confusing and contradictory from the outside. Awareness lets you see straight through manipulation instead of getting caught in it. Understanding lets you respond with a lot more wisdom the next time it shows up, and both of those things help protect you from getting trapped inside unhealthy emotional dynamics again. The next time you come across someone whose confidence feels a little too exaggerated, whose sense of superiority feels rehearsed, whose need for admiration seems to have no bottom, look past the surface. Remember the emptiness they can never quite fill. Remember the dissatisfaction that never lets them rest. Remember the exhausting performance they feel like they have to keep running. Remember the fear of becoming irrelevant that trails behind them everywhere they go. Remember the intimacy they secretly long for but can't let themselves accept. And remember that what looks powerful from a distance might actually be hiding some real, deep vulnerability just underneath the surface. The greatest tragedy in all of this isn't only the pain narcissists cause the people around them, as real and serious as that pain absolutely is. There's another tragedy here too, one that tends to go completely unnoticed. They spend their whole lives chasing an image that was never even real to begin with. They defend a version of themselves that never truly belonged to them in the first place. They pour enormous energy into protecting an identity built on fear instead of authenticity. And in doing all of that, they end up missing out on the one thing that could have changed everything for them. The courage to let themselves be seen exactly as they truly are. Not perfect, not extraordinary, not untouchable, just real. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes from finally understanding this. Not freedom for them, necessarily, since so few narcissists ever choose to walk through that locked door on their own, but freedom for you, the person who's been standing on the other side of that wall, trying to make sense of the confusion, the highs and lows, the affection that turns to coldness without warning. Once you see the mechanism underneath the behavior, you stop asking yourself what you did wrong because you realize you were never the actual problem. You were simply standing near a structure that was always going to eventually crack, no matter who was standing there when it happened. That knowledge doesn't erase the hurt. It doesn't undo the confusion or the nights spent wondering what you could have done differently, but it does something almost as valuable. It gives you your own story back. It lets you stop rewriting your worth around someone else's inability to feel whole. And it lets you walk forward with your eyes open, carrying not bitterness, but clarity, which in the end is the far more useful thing to hold on to.